At my daughter's wedding rehearsal dinner, I dropped a serving tray. My husband Richard snapped his fingers at me in front of everyone. "Clean it up now, servant. Get down on your knees where you belong." As I knelt there with tears streaming down my face, the groom's father stood up. He walked over and knelt beside me, looked into my eyes, and whispered words that shattered my world. "Sarah, thought you were dead. I never married anyone else because of you." Before we proceed, thank you for watching her voice narrative. Please subscribe and tell us where you are watching from in the comment section. My name is Sarah and I am 58 years old. For 38 years I have been married to Richard Chen. For 38 years I have felt like nothing more than his personal maid. Tonight was supposed to be special. My daughter Emma's wedding rehearsal dinner at the Grand Harbor Hotel. Instead it became the night everything changed. I should have known Richard would find a way to ruin it. He always did when there were important people around. The ballroom glowed with soft lights and fresh flowers covered every table. I moved between the guests carrying trays of appetizers because Richard insisted we could not afford proper waitstaff. Yes, you heard that right. At my own daughter's wedding dinner, I was the one serving food. "Sarah, hurry up with those spring rolls." Richard's voice cut across the room like a knife. "These guests are hungry and you are moving too slow as usual." My face burned hot as heads turned to look at me. Mrs. Patterson from Richard's law firm whispered something to her husband. The other parents at the wedding party looked away in embarrassment. I was the only mother serving at her own daughter's celebration. "Coming, dear," I said quietly, gripping the heavy tray tighter in my aching hands. At 58 my hands were not as strong as they used to be. Or maybe it was just that my spirit had grown so weak after decades of this treatment. I had learned long ago to keep my voice soft even when my heart was screaming. Emma sat at the main table with her fiancé James. She looked so beautiful in her emerald dress with her dark hair swept up elegantly. She was 32 years old, smart, successful, everything I had hoped she would become. More than that, she was kind. She had always been kind to me, even when she saw how her father treated me. James sat beside her looking nervous in his suit. I had met him only a handful of times, but he seemed like a good man. His father sat on his other side. A tall man with silver hair and warm eyes that seemed somehow familiar. I had heard he was wealthy, owned several successful tech companies. But there was something gentle about him that set him apart from the usual people Richard tried to impress. As I approached their table, Emma smiled at me with sadness in her eyes. "Mom, please sit down. You should not have to serve everyone. This is supposed to be your night too." Richard laughed loudly from across the room, making sure everyone heard. "Your mother likes to keep busy, Emma. Gives her something useful to do. Otherwise she would just sit there being useless like always." I forced a smile and kept moving. The shame felt like a weight pressing down on my chest, but I was used to it. 38 years of marriage had taught me that fighting back only made things worse. At least Emma looked uncomfortable with her father's words. That was something. The disaster struck when I reached James's father's table. My sleeve caught the edge of a wine glass and everything moved in slow motion. The tray tilted and spring rolls scattered across the white tablecloth. Hot sauce splattered on the expensive carpet beneath us. "Oh God, I am so sorry," I whispered, my hands shaking as I tried to gather the mess. "Please forgive me. I'm so clumsy." The entire ballroom went silent. Every conversation stopped. Every eye turned toward me. Richard's face turned red with rage. He stood so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. The sound echoed through the horrible silence. "Look at her," Richard announced to the entire room. His voice dripped with disgust. "Clumsy, worthless woman. This is why I never let her do anything important. She ruins everything she touches." My heart pounded so hard I thought everyone could hear it. I dropped to my knees and started picking up spring rolls with my bare hands. The smell of soy sauce mixed with my shame and humiliation. I could feel 200 eyes watching me, judging me, pitying me. "Get on your knees and clean it properly," Richard commanded, pointing at the stain spreading across the carpet. "Use your hands since you are too stupid to use a towel." And do not get up until every single piece is picked up. The room was so quiet I could hear the air conditioning humming. I was already on my knees, but something about the way he said it, like I was an animal instead of his wife, made something inside me crack. Tears started flowing down my cheeks as I scrubbed at the carpet with my trembling hands. That is when everything changed forever. James's father stood up so abruptly his chair crashed backward onto the floor. Several guests gasped at the loud bang. The anger in his face was like nothing I had ever seen before. "What did you just say to her?" the man said. His voice was low and dangerous in a way that made everyone freeze. Richard straightened up, clearly surprised someone was challenging him. "Excuse me. This is my wife and I will speak to her however I choose." Without warning, James's father kicked his own chair away from the table. It skidded across the floor and hit the wall with a bang that made people jump. Then he did something that made my heart stop completely. He knelt down on the floor next to me. His expensive suit pressed against the stained carpet as he gently placed his hands on either side of my face. His touch was so gentle, so completely different from Richard's rough handling over the years. When our eyes met, all the color drained from his face. His hands started shaking against my cheeks. "Sarah," he whispered. His voice broke like something inside him was shattering. "Sarah Mitchell, is it really you?" I stared into his eyes. Kind brown eyes that I recognized even though I had not seen them in 38 years. Eyes that had looked at me with pure love when I was 20 years old. Eyes that had haunted my dreams and nightmares for nearly 4 decades. "Michael," I breathed. The name escaped my lips like a prayer. His thumbs gently wiped tears from my cheeks as he spoke. His voice barely loud enough for anyone else to hear. "You disappeared 38 years ago. I searched everywhere. I hired investigators. I never stopped looking. I thought you were dead, Sarah. I thought I had lost you forever." The room around us vanished. The shocked gasps from the guests meant nothing. Richard's confused stammering faded to nothing. Emma's wide-eyed stare disappeared. All I could see was Michael, the man I had loved with every piece of my soul when I was young. The man I had been forced to abandon when I discovered I was pregnant with Emma. "I had to leave," I tried to say, but my voice would not work properly. "Michael, I had no choice." "What happened to you?" Michael asked, his eyes searching my face. He saw every line that 38 years had carved there. Every shadow that sadness had left behind. "Where did you go, Sarah? Why did you disappear without a word?" Before I could answer, Richard's voice exploded above us. "What the hell is going on here? Sarah, get up right now. Stop making a scene." Michael's jaw tightened, but he did not take his hands from my face. Instead, he helped me stand up, his movements careful and protective. He was taller than I remembered, his shoulders broader, but his touch was exactly the same as it had been 38 years ago. "Sarah," Michael said, his voice stronger now as he addressed everyone in the ballroom, "is clearly a lady who deserves respect and dignity, not humiliation and abuse." He turned to face Richard, and I saw something in his expression that made my husband step backward. "I am Michael Torres," he said clearly. "I own Torres Technologies and several other companies. And you, sir, just made the worst mistake of your life by treating this woman the way you did." I heard several people gasp. Everyone in the city knew the name Michael Torres. He was worth billions. His companies employed thousands. But all I could think about was the young man who used to read poetry to me in the park near our college. "Dad," James's voice cut through the tension. He was staring at Michael with complete confusion. "You know Emma's mother. How is that possible?" Michael glanced at his son, then back at me. "Our children were about to get married," I realized with shock. "I knew Sarah a long time ago," Michael said. His eyes never left mine. "We were very close. We were going to get married." The words hung in the air like a bomb that had just exploded. Richard's face cycled from red to purple to pale white. "This is insane. Sarah, we are leaving right now. Stop this ridiculous drama." But Michael stepped between us. For the first time in 38 years, someone was standing up for me. "I do not think Sarah wants to leave," Michael said calmly. You, Sarah. Everyone was looking at me. Richard with rage and fear. Emma with concern and confusion. James with shock. And Michael with something that looked like desperate hope mixed with old pain. After almost 4 decades of being silenced, of being treated like I was invisible, I had a choice to make. I opened my mouth but no words came out. How could I explain 38 years of secrets in front of 200 people? How could I tell my daughter that everything she knew about her family was a lie? How could I admit that I had been trapped in this nightmare since I was 20 years old? Michael seemed to understand my struggle. He gently took my hand, the same hand that wore Richard's wedding ring, and squeezed it softly. You do not have to say anything right now, he said quietly, but loud enough for those nearby to hear. But Sarah, you should know that some of us never forgot you. Some of us never stopped loving you. The way he said it made my heart stop beating for a moment. After all these years, all this pain and suffering, Michael still remembered the girl I used to be. The girl who had dreams and ambitions. The girl who believed in love. The girl I had buried deep inside when I became Richard's wife. As I stood there in my wine-stained clothes, surrounded by shocked guests and facing the 2 most important men from my past and present, I realized my carefully controlled life was about to collapse. But for the first time in 38 years, I was not sure that was a terrible thing. That night I could not sleep. I lay in the bed I had shared with Richard for 38 years, staring at the ceiling while he snored beside me. The events at the hotel played over and over in my mind like a movie I could not stop watching. Michael's face when he recognized me. The gentle way he had touched my cheek. The shock in his voice when he said my name. But mostly I remembered him saying he thought I was dead. That he had never stopped looking for me. Richard had barely spoken during the drive home. His silence was almost scarier than his usual criticism and yelling. I knew he was planning something. Probably finding a way to punish me for embarrassing him. At 58, I was still being treated like a child who could not make her own decisions. When the first light came through the bedroom curtains, I gave up trying to sleep. I walked to the kitchen feeling like a ghost in my own home. The house felt different somehow. Like the walls knew that everything was about to change forever. I made coffee with shaking hands and sat at the small kitchen table where I had eaten thousands of lonely meals over the years. That is when the memories came flooding back as clear as if they had happened yesterday. 1986. I was 19 years old working part-time at the university library while studying art history at Pacific Coast University. My parents had died in a house fire 3 years earlier, leaving me with just enough insurance money to pay for school if I was very careful with every dollar. I first saw Michael in Professor Anderson's literature class. He sat in the middle row, always arriving exactly 5 minutes early. He carried a leather backpack and drank coffee that smelled like cinnamon. He was 20 years old, 1 year ahead of me, studying computer science but taking literature classes because he loved reading. What struck me first was not his kind brown eyes or his warm smile. It was the way he listened. When other students spoke, Michael gave them his complete attention. He nodded thoughtfully and asked questions that showed he truly cared about what they were saying. In a world where I had felt invisible since my parents died, Michael's attention felt like sunlight after a long cold winter. We started talking after class about the books we were reading. Then those conversations moved to the campus coffee shop. Then to long walks around the lake behind the school. Michael had big dreams. He wanted to create technology that would help people. Software that would make life easier for families and small businesses. I want to build something that matters. He told me one spring afternoon as we sat under a blooming cherry tree. Not just to make money but to actually improve people's lives. Everyone deserves access to good technology that makes their work easier. I loved listening to him talk about his ideas. His eyes would light up when he described the programs he wanted to create. The companies he wanted to build. But what I loved most was that he included me in those dreams. When we get married, he would say. Not if but when, because we both knew it would happen. You can help me design the interfaces. You have such a good eye for making things beautiful and easy to use. Those were the happiest months of my life. We studied together in the library, sharing whispered jokes between the bookshelves. Michael would bring me wildflowers he picked on his way to campus. Daisies, poppies, whatever was blooming that week. I pressed one of those flowers in my copy of poetry by Robert Frost, the book Michael had given me for my 20th birthday. We made love for the first time in December in Michael's small apartment off campus. He was so gentle and careful with me. Afterward he held me close and said, "I am going to love you for the rest of my life, Sarah Mitchell. I promise you that with everything I am." I believed him. God help me, I believed every single word. The pregnancy test came back positive in March of 1987. I was 3 weeks late and I knew before I even took the test. My body felt different in ways I could not explain. I sat on the bathroom floor of my tiny apartment staring at those 2 pink lines. My first emotion was pure joy. Michael and I were going to have a baby. We had talked about children many times. He wanted 3, I wanted 4. We would compromise and see what happened. We were not married yet, but we had been talking about it constantly. Michael had been saving money for a ring. He had shown me pictures of the simple gold band he wanted to buy. I practically floated to campus that day, ready to tell him the news. We would figure it out together like we figured out everything. Maybe we would get married sooner than planned. Maybe we would have to get a bigger apartment. It would all work out because we loved each other so completely. I never got the chance to tell him. Richard Chen appeared in my life like a dark cloud covering the sun. He was 24 years old, 6 years older than me. He worked as a junior lawyer at his father's law firm. More importantly, he was Linda Chen's brother. Linda was my supervisor at the library. "My brother has been asking about you." Linda told me that Thursday afternoon as I shelved returned books. "He saw you here last week and thinks you are very pretty. He wants to take you to dinner." I smiled politely. "That is very nice, Linda, but I have a boyfriend. I am actually very serious with him." Linda's face became serious. "Sarah, honey, you need to think practically. Richard has a good job and money in the bank. A real future ahead of him. That computer science boy you have been seeing," she shook her head. "Those kinds of dreams do not pay bills. Most of those tech startups fail within a year." "Michael is not just dreams," I said firmly. "He is smart and hardworking and he will be successful." "And currently broke," Linda interrupted. "Look, I like you, Sarah. You are a good worker and responsible. But you are also an orphan with no family to help you if something goes wrong. If you got sick or pregnant or lost your job, what would that boy do for you? Richard could take care of you properly. Give you real security." I tried to dismiss the conversation, but Linda would not let it go. She arranged for Richard to accidentally run into me at the library several times that week. He was handsome in a sharp way. Dark hair, expensive suits, confident smile. He seemed financially stable and successful. But something about him made me uncomfortable. He looked at me like I was a prize to win rather than a person to love. The real problem started when I missed 2 days of work because of morning sickness. I told Linda I had the flu, but she was too observant and too nosy. "You are pregnant," she said one day when she cornered me in the library break room. It was not a question. My face must have given me away because Linda nodded with a grim expression. "Does he know?" she asked. "Not yet," I whispered. "I'm going to tell Michael tonight." "Michael?" Linda looked genuinely shocked. "Sarah, that boy can barely afford his own rent. How is he going to support a wife and baby? He will probably run away the moment you tell him. They always do." "He will not run," I said firmly, even though fear was creeping into my heart. "Michael loves me." Linda sighed like she was dealing with a foolish child. "Honey, I have seen this story 100 times. College boys love to play house until reality hits. Then they disappear. But Richard," she paused for effect. "Richard has been talking about marriage. He really cares about you, Sarah. And he could give that baby a name and a real future." The words hit me like a slap. Name. In 1987, having a baby outside marriage was still considered shameful in our community. I had seen how people treated unwed mothers. The whispers and judgment. The doors that closed in their faces. The way even family members turned away. But Michael would marry me. I was sure he would. We were planning to marry anyway. That is what I thought until Linda showed me the newspaper article. "I did not want to show you this," she said. Her voice was full of fake sympathy. "But you need to know who you are really dealing with." The headline read, "Local family business collapses under debt." Michael's last name was mentioned prominently. His father's small software company had gone bankrupt. According to the article, the Torres family owed investors over $200,000. They had lost their home and were facing multiple lawsuits. "He never told you," Linda asked softly, "about his family's financial disaster?" My hands shook as I read the article. Michael had mentioned his father was having some business trouble, but he had made it sound temporary and manageable. This made it sound like his entire family was drowning in debt. "Think about your baby," Linda continued. "Do you really want to raise a child in poverty with a father who cannot even help his own family? Richard could give you both security and respectability. He has already told me he would be willing to marry you despite your situation." Despite your situation. As if my pregnancy was something shameful instead of a blessing. "I need time to think," I whispered. "Do not think too long," Linda warned. "Richard is a good catch, but he will not wait forever. And every day you wait, you will start showing more." That night I sat in my apartment staring at the phone. I wanted to call Michael, to ask him about the article, to tell him about the baby. But what if Linda was right? What if Michael ran when he realized the burden? What if his family's financial problems meant he could never provide for us? I put my hand on my still flat stomach and thought about my child's future. Did I have the right to condemn my baby to poverty just because I was in love? What kind of mother would I be if I chose romance over my child's security and welfare? The next morning I walked around campus for hours trying to decide. By evening I had made my choice. I would marry Richard Chen. I would give my baby a name and financial security, even if it cost me my own happiness. I never told Michael about the pregnancy. Instead, I told him I had realized we wanted different things in life. That I needed security more than romance. I watched his heart break right there in his beautiful brown eyes. But I forced myself to stay strong. For the baby. For her future. 2 months later, I was Mrs. Richard Chen. Emma was born 7 months after the wedding. A supposedly premature baby who weighed 7.5 pounds and was perfectly healthy. Richard never questioned the timing. I never told him the truth about Emma's real father. For 38 years I kept that secret locked away. For 38 years I told myself I had made the right choice. The responsible choice. The choice any good mother would make. But sitting in my kitchen at dawn, remembering the gentle way Michael had touched my face just hours before, I wondered if I had made the biggest mistake of my entire life. The worst part was that Michael had become everything he dreamed of becoming. While I spent decades as Richard's unpaid servant, Michael had built a technology empire. He had created programs that helped millions of people just like he always wanted. And judging by the way he looked at me last night, he had never forgotten the girl who used to believe in his dreams. I reached into my pocket and pulled out something I had carried for 38 years. A small silver pendant containing the pressed flower Michael had given me on my 20th birthday. I had hidden it from Richard all these years. The only piece of my real self I had managed to keep safe. As I sat there in my empty kitchen, I opened the pendant and looked at the faded flower inside. It was still there, still preserved, just like my love for the man who had given it to me. And now he was back in my life just when I thought it was too late for second chances. 4 days passed after the rehearsal dinner, and I felt like I was living in a strange dream. Richard had barely spoken to me, which was actually a relief. His silence meant he was planning his next move. But for now I had peace to think clearly for the first time in years. I was in the kitchen Wednesday morning washing dishes while Richard read the business section when the doorbell rang. My heart jumped into my throat. We rarely had visitors, and Richard controlled who was allowed to come to our house. "Sarah, answer the door," Richard commanded without looking up from his newspaper. I dried my hands on a towel and walked to the front door. Through the frosted glass I could see a tall figure in what looked like an expensive suit. My breath caught. Even after 38 years I recognized that shape, that posture. I opened the door and there stood Michael looking just as nervous as I felt. He was holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. Daisies and poppies just like the ones he used to bring me in college. The sight made tears spring to my eyes. "Hello, Sarah," he said softly. "I hope you do not mind me stopping by. I got your address from," he paused looking embarrassed. "I hired someone to find you years ago. I have known where you lived for a long time, but I never had the courage to approach you. After Sunday night, I could not stay away anymore." "Michael," I whispered, glancing nervously toward the kitchen where Richard was still reading. "This is not a good time." "Who is at the door, Sarah?" Richard's voice boomed from the kitchen. Michael's jaw tightened when he heard Richard's commanding tone. Even from another room, my husband's voice carried a note of ownership that made me feel sick. "An old friend," I called back. My voice was shaking. "From college." I heard Richard's newspaper rustle, then his heavy footsteps approaching. Michael stepped closer to the doorway, his eyes searching my face with concern. "Are you afraid of him?" Michael asked quietly. The gentleness in his voice almost broke me completely. Before I could answer, Richard appeared behind me. His presence immediately filled the space with tension. He was several inches shorter than Michael, but he carried himself like he owned the world. Well, Richard said with fake cheerfulness. "It is not the famous Michael Torres. What brings you to our humble home?" Michael's expression stayed polite but cool. "I wanted to apologize for the disruption at the rehearsal dinner. Seeing Sarah after so many years caught me completely off guard." "I'm sure it did," Richard replied. His voice had an edge to it now. "Sarah has that effect on people, always causing problems without meaning to." I watched Michael's hands clench at his sides. He was fighting to control his temper. The Michael I had known in college had been gentle, but there was something harder about him now. Something forged by decades of business and success. "Actually," Michael said carefully, "I think Sarah handled herself with remarkable grace under very difficult circumstances." The two men stared at each other, and I felt like I was watching a chess match where I was somehow the prize neither would admit they wanted. "Well," Richard said finally, "it was nice of you to stop by, but we are quite busy today. Sarah has a lot of housework to catch up on." Actually, I heard myself say. The word surprised all three of us. "I was just about to go grocery shopping. Michael, would you like to join me? We could catch up properly." The silence that followed felt heavy and dangerous. Richard's face turned that familiar shade of purple. But with Michael standing right there, he could not explode the way he normally would. Instead, he forced a tight smile that did not reach his eyes. "Of course, dear. Do not be gone too long. You know how I worry." The threat in his voice was subtle but clear. Michael caught it too. I could tell by the way his expression hardened. 20 minutes later, I found myself sitting across from Michael in a small cafe across town. I felt like I was 20 years old again. He had insisted on driving me there in his car. A nice but modest sedan despite his wealth. I had expected something flashy, but Michael had never been about showing off. "You do not have to pretend with me, Sarah," he said gently after the waitress brought our coffee. "I can see it in your eyes. The way you flinched when he raised his voice. How long has he been treating you like that?" I wrapped my hands around my coffee cup, needing something solid to hold on to. "It is not what you think. Richard is just set in his ways. Traditional values. Traditional men do not humiliate their wives in public," Michael said firmly. "Traditional men do not speak to women they supposedly love the way he spoke to you Sunday night." The word love hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning and history. I stared into my coffee, afraid to meet Michael's eyes. "Tell me about your life," Michael said, changing the subject, but not really. "Are you happy, Sarah? Really, truly happy?" The question was so simple, but I could not remember the last time anyone had asked me that. When was the last time anyone cared about my happiness at all? "I have Emma," I said finally. "She is a good daughter. Smart and successful, and engaged to a wonderful man. That is Emma." "That is not what I asked," Michael said softly. I looked up at him then. Really looked at him for the first time. The years had been kind to Michael. His hair was silver now, and smile lines crinkled around his eyes. But he was still handsome. More than that, he still looked at me like I mattered, like my thoughts and feelings were important and worth caring about. I used to paint, I found myself saying. When Emma was little, I would paint during her naps. Watercolors mostly. Landscapes and flowers. Beautiful things. Richard said it was a waste of money and time, so I stopped. Do you still want to paint? Michael asked. I am 58 years old, I said with a bitter laugh. It is too late for dreams like that now. Sarah, Michael leaned forward and his voice became intense. I am 60 years old and I still have dreams every single day. It is never too late. Never. We sat in silence for a moment and I felt something stirring in my chest that I thought had died years ago. Oh, what about you? I asked. Are you married? Do you have other children? Michael's expression grew sad. I was married once. Briefly. About 12 years after you disappeared. Her name was Jennifer. She was a good, kind woman. But he paused, choosing his words carefully. I could not love her the way she deserved to be loved. She knew it too. We divorced after 3 years. Very amicable. No children together. James, I asked, remembering his handsome son. Adopted, Michael explained. Jennifer and I adopted him when he was 6. His parents were killed in a car crash and he was in foster care. Even after Jennifer and I divorced, James chose to stay with me. He has been the greatest joy of my life. Thought about Emma. How she had been the greatest joy of my life too. The only thing that made my marriage to Richard bearable. Sarah, Michael said quietly. I need to tell you something. After you disappeared, I looked for you everywhere. I hired private investigators and followed every lead. When I finally found you, you were already married to Richard. You already had Emma. You looked happy in the photographs the investigator took. So I stayed away. I thought you had found the life you wanted. My heart felt like it was breaking all over again. You found me. About 18 years ago, Michael admitted. The investigator took pictures of your family at Emma's middle school graduation. You were smiling. Richard had his arm around you. I thought you had found happiness. So I left you alone. Those pictures, I whispered. I remembered that day. I was smiling because Emma was graduating, not because I was happy with Richard. Michael's hands tightened around his coffee cup. If I had known the truth, if I had any idea what your marriage was really like, what would you have done? I asked. I would have fought for you, he said without hesitation. I would have reminded you that you deserved better. I would have shown you there were other options besides staying in a marriage that was slowly killing your spirit. The intensity in his voice made my heart race. This was not just nostalgia or curiosity. Michael still had real feelings for me. Deep feelings. Michael, I began, but he held up his hand. I know this is complicated, he said. I know you have a life and responsibilities. But Sarah, seeing you Sunday night and seeing how he treated you like you were nothing, I cannot pretend I do not still care about you deeply. I cannot pretend that losing you was not the biggest regret of my entire life. Tears started flowing down my cheeks. You do not understand. Cannot just leave. Richard would never let me go. And Emma. What would Emma think? Emma is 32 years old, Michael said gently. She is engaged and starting her own family now. Do you not think it is finally time you started living for yourself? For your own happiness? Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text message from Richard. Where are you? You have been gone 3 hours. Get home immediately. Michael saw me reading the message. He saw the fear cross my face. I have to go, I said, standing up quickly. He will be so angry if I am late. Otto stood too and pulled out his wallet. Sure, wait. Please take my card. He pressed a business card into my hand, then gently took my other hand and squeezed it tight. I meant what I said Sunday night, he whispered. I never stopped loving you. And I am not giving up on us this time. Not ever again. The drive back to my house was a complete blur. My mind kept replaying Michael's words. The gentle way he had touched my hand. The promise and determination in his voice. For 38 years I had convinced myself that marrying Richard had been the right choice. The practical, responsible thing to do for my baby. But sitting across from Michael in that little cafe, I remembered what it felt like to be truly cherished instead of merely tolerated. I remembered what it felt like to have someone care about my dreams and thoughts and happiness. I pulled into our driveway and saw Richard's shadow in the front window waiting for me like a dark storm cloud. My hands shook as I turned off the engine. In my purse, Michael's business card felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. As I walked toward the house, I realized that everything had fundamentally changed. I had spent nearly 4 decades being Richard's wife and Emma's mother. But I had completely forgotten how to be Sarah. Michael had reminded me that she still existed somewhere, buried beneath years of submission and silence and fear. The question was, after all these years, was it too late to set her free? Richard opened the door before I could even reach for the handle. His face was dark with suspicion and barely controlled rage. "You were gone a very long time for grocery shopping," he said coldly. Noting my empty hands. "I forgot my wallet," I lied smoothly. "I will go back tomorrow." As I walked past him into the house, I felt Michael's business card pressing against my palm through the fabric of my purse. For the first time in decades, I had a secret that was completely mine alone. And surprisingly, it did not feel like a betrayal at all. It felt like the first real breath of freedom I had taken in 38 years. The secret meetings with Michael continued for 3 weeks. We would meet at different cafes around the city, always somewhere Richard would never think to look for me. I told him I was running errands or visiting the library or shopping for Emma's wedding. Small lies that felt enormous to someone who had spent 38 years being completely honest and obedient. Each time I saw Michael, I felt a little more like my real self again. He brought me books of art history and poetry. He listened when I talked about the paintings I still dreamed of creating. He told me about his work creating software that helped small businesses thrive. When he spoke about his projects, his eyes lit up the same way they had when we were young. And I fell in love with him all over again. But the very best part was how he looked at me. Not like Richard, who saw me as a collection of failures and annoyances and disappointments, but like I was precious and valuable, like I was worth listening to, like I actually mattered in the world. It was during our 5th meeting that Michael asked the question I had been dreading most. "Sarah," he said, gently setting down his coffee cup, "I need to know something about Emma's father." We were sitting in a small bookshop cafe on the west side of town, surrounded by the smell of old books and fresh pastries and brewing coffee. My hands trembled as I reached into my purse and pulled out the silver pendant I had carried for 38 years. "You gave this to me for my 20th birthday," I said, opening it to show him the pressed flower still preserved inside. "I was wearing it the day I found out I was pregnant with Emma." Michael stared at the pendant, and recognition slowly dawned in his eyes. "You kept it all these years." "It was the only piece of you I was allowed to keep," I whispered. "Michael, Emma is not Richard's daughter. She is yours. She has always been yours." The silence that followed seemed to stretch on forever. Michael's face went completely pale, then flushed with emotions I could not begin to read. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "My daughter. Emma is my daughter." I nodded as tears streamed down my face. "I was going to tell you that day. But then Linda showed me that newspaper article about your father's company going bankrupt. She convinced me you could not provide for us." I was 19 and scared and completely alone. I thought I was protecting her. Protecting both of you. Michael's hands shook as he reached across the table to take mine. "Sarah, that newspaper article. My father's company did fail, but it was not because of anything dishonest or criminal. He had co-signed loans for 3 different friends who could not pay them back. We lost everything trying to help other people. Within 6 years I had rebuilt what we lost and more. Much more." The cruel irony hit me like a physical blow to the chest. I had given up the love of my life to protect my daughter from poverty. And in doing so I had condemned us both to a life that was poor in every way that truly mattered. 38 years, Michael whispered. His voice was breaking. I missed 38 years of my daughter's life. Her first words. Her first steps. Everything. "Michael, I am so sorry," I sobbed. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was being a good mother." "Sure," he said, moving to sit beside me and pulling me into his arms. "You were 19 and alone with no family. You did what you thought was best with the information you had. But Sarah, we have to tell her the truth now. Emma deserves to know. The thought of telling Emma that her entire life was built on lies terrified me. What if she hates me? What if she thinks I am a horrible person for lying to her for 32 years? Emma is a good person, Michael said firmly. I can see that even from the little time I have spent with her. Good people understand that sometimes we make impossible choices in impossible situations. That evening I came home to find Emma's car in our driveway. She was sitting at the kitchen table with Richard, and both of them looked up when I walked in. The tension in the room was immediately obvious and uncomfortable. Mom, Emma said, standing up to hug me. Dad told me you have been spending time with Mr. Torres. Is everything okay between you two? I shot a look at Richard, who was watching me with cold calculation in his eyes. He had been building his case against me, gathering information to use as weapons. Your mother has been acting very strangely since the rehearsal dinner, Richard said. His voice was dripping with fake concern. Running off for hours at a time, making excuses, lying about where she goes. I am worried about her mental state. She may be having some kind of breakdown. My mental state is perfectly fine, I said. My voice was stronger than I expected. Is it? Richard asked. Because from where I sit it looks like you are having some kind of midlife crisis. Getting swept up in romantic fantasies about the past like a foolish teenager. Emma frowned, looking between us with confusion and worry. What is he talking about, Mom? I looked at my daughter, Michael's daughter, and I realized I could not keep lying anymore. Not for one more second. Emma deserved the truth, even if it destroyed everything. Emma, I said quietly, I need to tell you something very important about your father. Richard's face went completely white. Sarah, do not you dare. Shut up, I said. My voice was stronger than it had been in decades. For once in your miserable life, just shut up and let me speak the truth. Emma's eyes widened in shock. She had never heard me talk to Richard that way before. No one had. 38 years ago I was deeply in love with someone else, I continued. My voice gained strength with each word. His name was Michael Torres, and we were planning to get married. When I found out I was pregnant with you, I was manipulated into believing that Michael could not provide for us financially. That marrying Richard was the responsible thing to do. So I lied to Michael. I broke his heart. And I married Richard to give you his name and financial security. The kitchen was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming in the corner. Emma stared at me in complete shock while Richard's face cycled through rage and fear and calculation. You are saying, Emma said very slowly, that Michael Torres is my biological father. He nodded. Tears were streaming down my face now. I have regretted that choice every single day for 38 years. This is completely insane, Richard exploded. He stood up so quickly his chair toppled backward and crashed to the floor. Sarah, you are having a mental breakdown. Emma, do not listen to this absolute nonsense. But Emma was not looking at Richard at all. She was staring at me with a mixture of shock and slowly dawning understanding. That is why you always look so sad, she said quietly. Even at my graduations and birthdays and achievements, you were mourning the life you gave up, the man you really loved. I was never sad because of you, I said quickly. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, Emma. The only good thing to come from my marriage. But yes, I mourned what could have been. Richard stepped between us. His face was twisted with rage and desperation. This is enough, Emma. Your mother is clearly having some kind of breakdown. She has been sneaking around town with this man, filling her head with romantic fantasies and lies. Have you been meeting with him? Emma asked me, ignoring Richard completely. Yes, I admitted. We have been talking, trying to understand what happened all those years ago. And Emma prompted gently. I looked at my daughter, this good intelligent woman I had raised, and I told her the complete truth. And I still love him, Emma. I never stopped loving him for one single day. The admission hung in the air like a bomb that had just detonated. Richard's face turned purple with rage, but Emma's expression was thoughtful, almost relieved somehow. Mom, Emma said softly, how has he treated you? Richard, the first knew. Really treated you all these years? The question caught me completely off guard. In all the years of my marriage, no one had ever asked me that question so directly. Emma, do not encourage this, Richard warned. His voice was getting louder. Your mother is clearly having delusions and you are making it worse. I was not talking to you, Emma snapped. I saw Michael's strength and determination in my daughter's voice and posture. Mom, I asked you a direct question. I looked at Emma, then at Richard, then back at my daughter. For 38 years I had protected Richard's reputation, made excuses for his cruel behavior, pretended that emotional abuse was just his personality. He treats me like a servant, I said quietly. He humiliates me in public, controls every single aspect of my life, and makes me feel completely worthless every single day. Emma's jaw clenched tight. I saw anger flash in her eyes. Not at me, but at the man she had called father her entire life. Is that true? Emma asked Richard. Her voice was deadly calm. Your mother exaggerates everything, Richard said dismissively. She has always been overly dramatic and emotional. Answer the question, Emma said. Have you been emotionally abusing my mother for 38 years? Richard sputtered, clearly not expecting to be challenged by his daughter. I do not have to listen to this ridiculous interrogation. Sarah, tell her you are sorry for this insane story and let us move on with our lives. But I was not sorry. For the first time in decades, I was not sorry for telling the truth. Emma, I said, there is something else you need to know. Michael does not know that you are his daughter. I never told him before today. Emma stared at me for a long moment. Then she pulled out her phone. What is his number? Emma, what are you doing? I asked. I'm calling my father, Emma said firmly. My real father. It is time we had an honest conversation about my mother and about me. Richard lunged for the phone, but Emma stepped away smoothly. Her hand was already dialing. Hello, Mr. Torres. This is Emma Chin. I think it is time we had a very important conversation about my mother. And about me. As I listened to my daughter arrange to meet the man who was her biological father, I felt 38 years of lies and secrets and fear finally cracking apart. It was absolutely terrifying and completely liberating at the same time. Richard stood in the corner. His face was a mask of rage and defeat and desperation. He had lost complete control of the narrative, lost his grip on both Emma and me. For the first time in our entire marriage, he was powerless. And I realized with sudden clarity that I was no longer afraid of him at all. I am leaving, I announced, surprising myself with the finality in my voice. I am filing for divorce. You cannot, Richard snarled. You have nothing, Sarah. You are nothing without me. You are wrong, I said, standing up straighter than I had in years. I have 38 years of life to reclaim, and I have a daughter who loves me enough to support my happiness. Emma finished her phone call and looked at me with something I had never seen in her eyes before. Respect. Michael is coming over right now, she said. It is time for this family to start telling the truth about everything. As we waited for Michael to arrive, I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to jump into a completely unknown future. It was terrifying, but for the first time in decades, I was not jumping alone. I had my daughter. I had the man I had never stopped loving. And most importantly, I finally had myself back. Michael arrived 40 minutes later. I watched through the front window as he parked his car and walked toward our house with purpose and determination in every step. Even from a distance, I could see the resolve in his stride. This was not the gentle college boy I had fallen in love with. This was a man who had built a technology empire from nothing. A man who was not afraid of confrontation. Richard had spent the last half hour pacing the living room like a caged animal, alternating between threats and attempts at manipulation. You think he really wants you now, he had sneered at me. You are 58 years old, Sarah. You are not the young girl he remembers. He will get bored and leave you. But Emma had stayed by my side the entire time. Her presence gave me strength I had forgotten I possessed. When Michael knocked, I opened the door myself. His eyes immediately found mine, searching for signs that I was all right. When he saw my tear-stained face but steady posture, something shifted in his expression. Relief mixed with fierce protectiveness. Sarah, he said softly. Then he looked at Emma. And you must be my daughter. The words hung in the air heavy with 38 years of lost time and missed moments. Emma stepped forward, extending her hand to Michael. I have so many questions, she said quietly. And I have 38 years of answers, Michael replied. His voice was thick with emotion. Richard chose that moment to assert himself. He strode into the foyer with false bravado and fake confidence. Well, is not this touching? The happy family reunion. His voice dripped with sarcasm and bitterness. Michael, you have caused quite enough trouble here. I think it is time you left my house. Michael turned to face Richard. I saw something cold and dangerous flash in his eyes. Actually, Richard, I think it is time you and I had a very serious conversation. Man to man. I do not have anything to say to you, Richard replied. But there was uncertainty creeping into his voice now. He was used to intimidating me, but Michael was a completely different proposition. But I have plenty to say to you, Michael said. His voice was quiet but deadly serious. For instance, I would like to know how you justify 38 years of emotional abuse. I would like to know how you sleep at night knowing you spent 4 decades systematically destroying the spirit of the most beautiful woman I have ever known. Richard's face flushed deep red. You do not know anything about our marriage. Sarah is my wife. Sarah is not your property, Emma interrupted. I felt a surge of pride at the strength in my daughter's voice. And from what I have observed over the years, you have treated her like an unpaid servant rather than a partner or equal. I watched this confrontation unfold, feeling like I was seeing my entire life from the outside for the very first time. Richard, who had seemed so powerful and controlling for so long, suddenly looked small and pathetic standing between Michael and Emma. Sarah, Michael said, turning to me. I want you to know that whatever you decide, I will support you completely. If you want to try to work things out with Richard, the first will respect that decision. But if you want to leave, I will help you in every way I can. You will not be alone. The offer hung between us like a lifeline thrown to a drowning person. For 38 years I had felt completely trapped because I had nowhere to go. No resources of my own. Richard controlled our bank accounts, our social circle, every single aspect of my life. But Michael was offering me a way out. Real way out. Cannot, I whispered. Old fears rising up inside me like a flood. Richard is right about one thing. I do not have anything. No money, no career, no place to live. I am 58 years old. How do I possibly start over now? Michael stepped closer. His voice was gentle but absolutely firm. Sarah, do you remember what I told you about the technology incubator spaces I have built around the city? One of them has a beautiful art studio on the top floor that has been sitting empty for 8 months. The previous tenant was an elderly woman who taught painting classes there. She passed away last winter, and I have been looking for exactly the right person to take over the space. My heart stopped beating for a moment. What are you saying? I am saying that if you want it, the space is yours. Rent-free for the first year while you get back on your feet and establish yourself. There is even a small but comfortable apartment above the studio. You could teach art classes, sell your paintings, be the artist you were always meant to be. The generosity of the offer took my breath away completely. But Richard immediately jumped on it with desperate energy. You see, he said triumphantly. He is trying to buy you, Sarah. This is exactly what I have been warning you about. He thinks he can swoop in and rescue you just because he has money. No, Michael said firmly. His eyes never left mine. I am offering Sarah what she deserves and has always deserved. Respect, support, and the chance to live her own authentic life. Something you have never given her, Richard. Not once in 38 years. I looked around the room at these 3 people, each representing a completely different path for my future. Richard, who wanted to maintain control and keep me trapped in a life that was slowly killing my spirit and soul. Emma, who wanted me to be happy but was trying to respect both the man who had raised her and the man who had fathered her. And Michael, who was offering me freedom and support but asking for absolutely nothing in return. The choice should have been easy. But 38 years of conditioning and fear do not disappear overnight. I need some time to think, I said finally. Time to think, Richard exploded. Sarah, this is completely insane. You are talking about throwing away our entire life together for some ridiculous romantic fantasy. You are not 20 years old anymore. Stop, I said. My voice was stronger than I had heard it in years. Just stop talking, Richard. Richard's mouth snapped shut in complete shock. I had never spoken to him that way before in our entire marriage. You are right about one thing, I continued. I am not 20 anymore. I am 58 years old, and I have wasted nearly 40 years of my life being afraid. Afraid of making the wrong choice. Afraid of disappointing people. Afraid of being alone. Afraid of taking risks. I looked directly at Michael. I am tired of being afraid. Michael's eyes filled with hope, but he did not push or pressure me. He just waited patiently. Richard, I said, turning to face my husband directly. I want a divorce. The words came out clearer and stronger than I had expected. Richard actually staggered backward as if I had physically struck him. You cannot be serious, he stammered. Sarah, you are having some kind of breakdown. You need to think about this rationally and carefully. I have been thinking about this for 38 years, I replied. I should have left the first time you made me feel worthless. I should have left when you started controlling every aspect of my life. I should have left when I realized you saw me as property rather than a person. Where will you go? Richard asked desperately. What will you do? You have no skills, no education, no money, no. She has me, Michael said quietly but firmly. And she has Emma. And most importantly, she has herself. That is more than enough. Emma nodded, moving to stand beside me. Mom, I should have spoken up years ago. I saw how he treated you, and I was too much of a coward to say anything. I'm so sorry for that. You were protecting the only family structure you knew, I said gently, placing my hand on Emma's arm. I do not blame you for that at all, sweetheart. Richard looked around the room, slowly realizing he had lost all his allies and all his power. His face cycled through anger, desperation, and finally cold calculation. Fine, he said. His voice turned ice cold. But do not think this will be easy, Sarah. I will fight you on everything. The house, the savings, the investments, all of it. You will get absolutely nothing from me. I do not want anything from you, I replied calmly. I just want my freedom back. And you will have it, Michael said firmly. My lawyer will contact you tomorrow morning to discuss the divorce proceedings. This can be as easy or as difficult as you want to make it, Richard. The choice is entirely yours. The threat was subtle but absolutely unmistakable. Michael had resources and connections that Richard could not possibly match. We all knew it. This is not over, Richard snarled. He grabbed his keys from the hall table. Sarah, when you come to your senses and realize what a terrible mistake you have made, do not come crying back to me. He slammed the door behind him so hard that a picture frame fell off the wall and shattered on the floor. The three of us stood in the sudden silence, processing what had just happened. Are you absolutely sure about this? Emma asked quietly. Once you start divorce proceedings, there is no going back, Mom. I thought about the question very seriously. Was I sure? Leaving Richard meant giving up the security of marriage, even a bad one. It meant starting completely over at 58 with nothing but hope and the promise of help from a man I had lost contact with for nearly 4 decades. But then I looked at Michael. Really looked at him. This was not just about rekindling an old romance or chasing a fantasy. This was about reclaiming the woman I had been before I learned to make myself small and quiet and invisible. I'm sure, I said finally. For the first time in 38 years, I am absolutely sure about something. Michael stepped closer. His hands gently framed my face the same way he had at the hotel. Sarah, I need you to understand something very important. I am not trying to rescue you. You do not need rescuing. You need support and partnership. There is a big difference. The distinction mattered more than he could possibly know. Richard had always positioned himself as my savior. The man who had given me security and respectability and a name for my baby. But Michael was offering something completely different. Partnership, equality, respect, freedom. What happens now? I asked. Now you pack whatever you need for tonight, Michael said practically. You can stay in the guest room at my place until we get the apartment above the studio ready for you. Should only take a few days. Tomorrow we will meet with my lawyer and start the legal process of ending your marriage. And after that, Emma asked. Michael smiled. For the first time since this all began, his expression was purely joyful and hopeful. After that, your mother gets to discover who she really is when she is free to be herself for the first time in 38 years. As I walked upstairs to pack a suitcase, I felt like I was floating 6 inches off the ground. Every step away from the life I had known felt like shedding a heavy winter coat that I had worn too long in the wrong season. In the bedroom. Not my bedroom anymore. Richard's bedroom, I corrected myself. Packed very carefully. I took my clothes and my few pieces of jewelry. The books of poetry that Michael had given me in college, which I had hidden in the back of my closet for decades. Most importantly, I took the silver pendant with the pressed flower inside. It had sustained me through 38 years of loneliness and pain. A tiny piece of proof that I had once been loved completely and unconditionally. But now I did not need to hide it anymore. As I walked down the stairs with my suitcase, Michael and Emma were talking quietly in the living room. They looked up when they heard my footsteps. "Ready?" Michael asked gently. He nodded. Then I took one last look around the house where I had spent most of my adult life. It should have felt sad leaving behind so many years and memories. Instead, it felt like emerging from a long dark tunnel into bright sunlight. "I'm ready," I said. 9 months later, I stood in front of my easel in the art studio. A paintbrush in my hand and afternoon sunlight streaming through the tall windows. The canvas before me was alive with color. A landscape of the lake where Michael and I used to walk when we were young, but painted with the wisdom and perspective of a woman who had finally found her way home. The divorce had been finalized just 3 weeks ago. True to his threats, Richard had fought me on absolutely everything. But Michael's lawyer was brilliant. In the end, Richard's attempts to control the proceedings only made him look petty and vindictive to the judge. I walked away with enough money to be comfortable. But more importantly, I walked away with my freedom intact. The art studio had become everything Michael promised and so much more. I taught painting classes 4 afternoons a week to a wonderful group of women ranging in age from 25 to 75. We called ourselves the Second Chances, and every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday and Saturday the studio filled with laughter and creative energy and hope. I had sold 28 paintings in the past 7 months. Enough to prove to myself that this was not just a hobby but a genuine second career and calling. I was actually supporting myself as an artist at 58 years old. But the very best part was living above the studio in my own space. The small apartment was nothing like the grand house I had shared with Richard, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every book, every coffee cup, every painting on the walls had been chosen by me for me. When I woke up in the morning, I could hear birds singing instead of Richard's criticisms and complaints. The doorbell chimed, and I looked up to see Michael walking into the studio. Even after 9 months, my heart still skipped a beat when I saw him. We had been taking things slowly and carefully. I had needed time to rediscover who I was outside of my marriage to Richard. And Michael had been patient and supportive throughout the entire process. "How is the painting coming?" he asked, walking over to stand beside me at the easel. "Almost finished," I said, adding a touch of gold to autumn leaves reflected in the lake water. "I think it might be one of my best pieces yet." Michael studied the canvas thoughtfully. "You have captured something really beautiful here, Sarah. The light, the way it dances on the water. It reminds me of that day we spent at the lake when you were 20. Do you remember? It was October and you wore that yellow sweater that matched the falling leaves." I set down my paintbrush and turned to face him, amazed as always by how clearly he remembered our time together decades ago. "I remember everything about that day," I said. "You read me poetry by Robert Frost under the oak tree. The road not taken. 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood," Michael quoted softly, his eyes never leaving mine. "And I took the one less traveled by. And that has made all the difference." "I cannot believe you still remember that poem word for word," I said, feeling tears spring to my eyes. "I remember everything about you, Sarah," he replied, reaching up to gently touch my face with such tenderness. "I have had 40 years to memorize every single moment we shared together." The intensity in his voice made my breath catch in my throat. We had been spending time together almost every single day. He would take me to dinner at small quiet restaurants. We would walk through art museums for hours. He would bring me flowers from the community gardens he sponsored. But we had not talked about the future, about what this relationship was becoming. "Sarah," Michael began. But I placed a gentle finger against his lips. "Before you say anything," he said with a small smile, "I have something for you." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. My heart stopped completely. 40 years ago I was saving money to buy you an engagement ring," he said. His voice was trembling slightly. I had picked it out. Had it on layaway at the jewelry store downtown near campus. When you disappeared, I could not bring myself to cancel the order. I kept paying on it month after month, year after year, telling myself I was being completely foolish. But I was unable to let go. He opened the box, revealing a simple but absolutely beautiful solitaire diamond ring. It was not large or flashy or ostentatious. It was exactly what I would have chosen for myself at 20, and exactly what I would choose now at 58. "I picked it up from the jeweler last week," Michael continued. "Sarah Mitchell, will you marry me? Will you let me spend whatever years I have left trying to make up for the 40 years we lost?" I stared at the ring, then at Michael's hopeful, nervous face. This was not the desperate proposal of a young man afraid of losing his girlfriend. This was the considered, thoughtful offer of a mature man who knew exactly what he was asking and exactly what he was promising in return. "Yes," I said. My voice was barely above a whisper. "Yes, Michael, I will marry you." His face lit up with pure joy as he slipped the ring onto my finger. Fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting patiently for 40 years just for this exact moment. He pulled me into his arms and kissed me. I felt like I was 20 years old again, full of hope and dreams and infinite possibilities for the future. When we finally broke apart, I was crying and laughing at the same time. "I never thought I would get a second chance at this kind of happiness," I said. "We are not getting a second chance," Michael replied, his arms still around me, holding me close. "We are getting our first real chance. Everything that happened before was just preparation for this moment right now." The wedding was small and absolutely perfect. Emma walked me down the aisle of a little chapel surrounded by beautiful gardens. James stood as Michael's best man. The Second Chances painting group served as my bridesmaids. A bouquet of women in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. All of us living proof that it is never too late for new beginnings. Linda Chan, Richard's sister who had convinced me to marry him all those years ago, showed up unexpectedly at the reception. I had not seen her since the divorce. I braced myself for confrontation or criticism or judgment. Instead, she approached me with tears streaming down her face. "Sarah," she said quietly, "I owe you a massive apology. Huge one. I convinced you to marry my brother because I genuinely believed financial security was the most important thing a woman could have. I was completely wrong. I can see now how truly happy you are. Really happy for the first time. And I realize now what I cost you all those years ago." Her apology surprised me completely. For 40 years I had carried deep resentment toward Linda for her role in pushing me toward Richard. But standing there in my wedding dress holding Michael's hand, I found that the anger was completely gone. "We all did what we thought was best with the information we had at the time," I said, echoing Michael's words from months ago. "I forgive you, Linda. Completely." She hugged me tightly. I felt another piece of the painful past heal and release its grip on me. Richard did not attend the wedding, obviously. But I heard through mutual acquaintances that he had already started dating someone new. A much younger woman who worked as a paralegal at his law firm. I felt sorry for her. But I also felt a deep sense of relief that it was no longer my responsibility to manage his ego or endure his control. The honeymoon was a 2-week trip to Italy. Something I had dreamed about for decades but never imagined I would actually experience. Michael and I spent the time wandering through art museums, sitting in sidewalk cafes, and talking about everything we had missed during our 40 years apart. "Do you have any regrets?" he asked one evening as we sat by the Trevi Fountain in Rome watching tourists throw coins and make wishes. I considered the question very seriously. Did I regret the 40 years I had spent with Richard? The dreams I had deferred? The woman I had suppressed? The time I had lost forever? I regret the pain, I said finally. I regret the loneliness and the constant fear. But I do not regret Emma. And I do not regret the lessons I learned about my own strength and resilience. If I had not been through all of that, I might not appreciate what we have right now. Michael took my hand, running his thumb over my wedding ring. The ring that had waited 40 years for me to be ready to wear it. You know what I love most about us now, he said. What I ask? We are not trying to recapture our youth. We are not trying to pretend we are 20 again. We are two people who have lived full, complicated lives, who have made mistakes and learned from them, who know exactly how precious and rare this kind of love really is. He was absolutely right. What Michael and I had now was deeper and richer than what we had shared as teenagers. It was love tempered by experience, strengthened by loss, made precious by the knowledge of how easily it could be lost forever. 1 year after our wedding, I held my first solo art exhibition at a prestigious gallery in downtown Dallas. 40 paintings filled the elegant space. Landscapes, portraits, abstracts, still lives. All created during my year of freedom and rediscovery and healing. The opening night was packed with friends, serious art collectors, and complete strangers who had been drawn by the beauty and raw emotion in my work. Emma stood beside one of my paintings. She was visibly pregnant now, glowing with happiness. She and James were expecting their first child in 2 months. She was talking animatedly to a potential buyer about the meaning behind the piece. Michael moved through the crowd with natural ease, introducing me to important people. His pride in my work was evident to everyone who met us. Mrs. Torres, the gallery owner, said, approaching me with a satisfied smile. I am extremely pleased to tell you that we have sold 31 paintings tonight. You have a waiting list of over 50 people who want to commission custom work. This is remarkable for a first exhibition. Mrs. Torres. I was still getting used to my new name, to the identity that came with it. Sarah Chan had been defined entirely by her marriage to Richard, by her role as Emma's mother, by her ability to make herself invisible and small. Sarah Torres was an artist, a wife by free choice rather than obligation or fear, a woman who had finally learned to take up space in the world without apologizing. Thank you, I said to the gallery owner. This has been more wonderful than I ever imagined possible. As the evening wound down, Michael and I found ourselves alone in the gallery, surrounded by my paintings. The small red dots marking sold pieces covered the walls like victories. Proud of yourself, Michael asked, wrapping his arms around me from behind. I leaned back against his chest, looking around at the visual representation of my completely new life. Amazed more than proud, I said. 1 year ago I was 58 and convinced my life was essentially over, that I had missed my chance at happiness. Now look at all this. Now look at you, Michael corrected gently. This is not about the paintings or the gallery or even our marriage, Sarah. This is about you finally remembering who you were always meant to be. Later that night we sat on the balcony of our home overlooking the Dallas skyline. Michael had asked me to move in with him 6 months after our wedding. The city sparkled below us, full of lights and life and infinite possibilities. What are you thinking about? Michael asked, noticing my contemplative mood. That young girl who used to dream about having a life like this, I said. She had to wait 60 years to get it. But she finally got it. We got it, Michael corrected, taking my hand in his. And we are going to enjoy and cherish every single minute we have left together. I looked at my husband, the love of my life, the father of my daughter, the man who had waited 40 years and never stopped believing. 2 roads diverged in a wood, I said softly, and I took the one less traveled by. Michael smiled and finished the quote. And that has made all the difference. We sat there in comfortable silence. 2 people who had taken the long, difficult road to find their way back to each other, who had learned that it is never too late to choose happiness, never too late to reclaim yourself, never too late to start again. I was 59 years old, and my life had finally begun. Now I am curious about you who watched my story all the way to the end. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Have you ever had to choose between security and happiness? Comment below and let me know. Meanwhile, I am leaving 2 other incredible stories on your screen that you absolutely need to watch. They will surprise you. Thank you so much for watching until the very end.